Welcome in, everyone, to another episode of the Shawn and Sus show. Today, we're mixing it up, doing something a little bit different. Going to be doing little tier rankings and overall rankings of the 5-6 turn running backs. A sweet spot right now in drafts to attack if you're building out really any type of build, an early wide receiver start, hero running back early, tack on another one of these guys. It's a really sweet pocket right now. We want to get it right, make sure that we're not just attacking a bunch of these guys, but getting the right ones and passing on the wrong ones. But before we dive too deep into that today, Shawn, how's it going?
Good. I'm excited to talk about these guys. I feel like I've had picks on the board deciding between a few of these, and it often decides your destiny if your second running back really puts up a low RB1, high RB2, or potentially higher numbers, or if it's a zero RB, then you definitely got to get that right. So it was definitely hard to rank. This is one of the key questions, I think, because I tend to be taking running back a lot in this range, and once until you dive in, it's really hard to distinguish. And we have a few disagreements, I think. So
For
I'm
sure.
excited for
And
that.
this was an important range to get right last year. Slightly different drafting landscape last year, but last year you had Josh Jacobs in this range, you had Joe Mixon in this range. A little later, you had guys like James Conner and David Montgomery. And some of the names this year are familiar, some are a little different. But we're going to dive on in to our top tier. Now, we do this, we each have our own tier here. So, diving into tier one, I have Joe Mixon and Kenneth Walker up top. Shawn has Kenneth Walker and Chuba up top. So, Shawn, we both like Kenneth Walker a lot, clearly. What do you like so much about Kenneth Walker?
So I number one is the upside. He's both a top end rusher and his receiving is underrated. He hasn't received the level of volume that you would expect, but per PFF, his receiving grades, whenever he does get an opportunity, are pretty positive. And we'll see if Sam Darnold dumps the ball down a bit more to his running backs. He certainly liked throwing it to Aaron Jones when he was a Viking, but of course, different team, different system, but at least there's some evidence there. So overall, the run, the rush receiving upside, and really it's a bet also on some of the rookies to come in and provide some run blocking support. They're not one of the top end lines, but if they're even average for someone that on a pure talent basis is maybe top 10, top 12. And this is the 15 to RB21 roughly at the 5-6 turn. So that combination, a general good feeling about the offense. That's what I'm excited for. So where do you stand with Ken?
I think he has RB1 upside this year. Top 10 upside, maybe top 8 if things break right. Super explosive player. New system incoming this year. They fire their offensive coordinator from last year for throwing too much. So we not only going to get an increased rush rate over expectation, I believe, but we're also going to get Clint Kubiak coming over, bringing a lot of checkdowns. They keep hammering that they're going to be having more checkdowns this year in terms of their passing game. I think Kenneth Walker could be like implemented kind of how they implemented Alvin Kamara in New Orleans. And if Kenneth Walker gets a spike in receiving work with how explosive he is, in addition to just a larger rushing pie and emphasis on the run game, if he can just stay healthy, man, Kenneth Walker rips off like RB1 week after RB1 week when things are going right. And it feels like it could be a career year for him.
Yeah, and when it's both Kenneth Walker and Charbonnet are healthy, Walker's getting about three-quarters of the work. Charbonnet is an excellent running back, but there's also some loose possibility that he gets moved. But it seems that Kenneth Walker is the one, still the main guy, even though he has one of the better backups in the league. And by any of the PFF like elusive rating, juke rate, he really stands out in this group. And of course it is a risk, but we're trying to win championships. We're trying to advance best balls. We're trying to claim tr- titles in these contests. So this is a
We're
definitely a
hunting
home run
upside.
swing. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, he could easily be a guy who approaches 1,700, 1,800 all purpose like scrimmage yards. rushing and receiving combined. You get the 1150, 1200 rushing yards, and then like 600, I think, receiving yards are really in play because not every week's going to be a smasher, but he'll break off like a 40, 50 yard reception from time to time, just how explosive he is. I think it's going to be a really special year for him. I'm loading up on Kenneth Walker. He does have a little bit of an injury risk, but I'm kind of just willing to say, okay, I'm not taking him 100% of the time. So, in the versions where I draft him are the ones where he's healthy or healthy enough. Are you comfortable with having Kenneth Walker as an RB1 in your build if you started off with like three other wide receivers and then like an elite tight end or quarterback, and then you're like, hey, round 5, Kenneth Walker? It's not too bad.
Yeah, I've been taking usually in pairs, like two out of this group if I'm doing that, just because of the risk that the RB room just gets very chopped. If something happens to him, I'm not on the side of the coin in season long. Sometimes I can take the Charbonnet and handcuff and just deal with paying up for this backfield and just longing Clint Kubiak and the Seahawks in general. But in a best ball format, I've at least been trying to get someone at least within the top 25 to complement him if I'm going very heavy receiver, or sometimes I've gone the Brock Bowers and an elite QB, but usually it's one of the single positions and a lot of receiver. There's still a lot of good receivers going, but this is a very strong range of guys that I've been targeting.
And as much as I like Kenneth Walker, which is a lot, I have Joe Mixon even a spot ahead of him, number one in this 5-6 turn range. I'm going to come out and say it. If I had to take Joe Mixon in the late 20s, I would do it.
Wow. That it's as a player, he's very good. He runs, he catches the ball, but his line is not great in terms of the overall scoring. I think they're somewhere middle of the pack in the league. The line by Mike Clay is bottom 5 by fantasy points is, I believe, last they had it, but that's also run and pass. But I think in general we're pretty concerned there. And so you bring in Nick Chubb and Marks as well. Was a mid round pick. He wasn't a round 7 guy. We're excited about Brashard Smith because he was awesome in college as a receiver, but Woody Marks still went rounds ahead of him for a reason. Of course, there's some plus EV for taking a running back middle and late rounds just from a team standpoint that other positions don't necessarily pan out in the draft, but they certainly wants to at least relinquish maybe some of the pressure. It doesn't mean that he's some kind of committee back, but he's, in terms of opportunity share, he's around the high 70s, low 80s, I believe. And I think that number is going to go down a bit.
So I think he actually had a sneaky number of games where he was clocking more of like the 65, 70%. I think we're going to get Woody Marks in the Dario Gunbowale third down back role, which is fine. Mixon didn't really have that too much last year. And there would even be games where, Damian Pierce mixes in for a couple carries pretty often. I think Nick Chubb's going to scoop those Damian Pierce carries. Damian Pierce carries go to 0. Mixon had like a crazy pace last year of like well into the 300 something rushing yard or rushing attempt pace. I don't think we need that to pay off a 5-6 turn price around ADP 58 at the moment. Dude averaged more fantasy points per game last year than Devon Achane. They both had kind of similar situations in terms of horrible offensive line play. Whereas Achane might benefit more if the Dolphins, improve their offensive line play. I don't know if they're going to improve their offensive line play. They just lost, their best offensive lineman to retirement, and they, to my knowledge, haven't really changed up their offensive philosophy going into next year. Whereas I was, if you check my Twitter, the two guys I tweeted about all season, just raging out about, Brian Callahan in Tennessee's play calling and Bobby Slowick's play calling in Houston. And, people are like, oh, Houston, they're still winning games. They're making the playoffs, bro. They won a playoff game and they still fired him. That's how bad Bobby Slowick was as a play caller. The most predictable run, pass offense the most predictable lanes. They ran like the same two rushing plays all the time, where Mixon would like either like kind of dive very simply up the middle or like bounce out. There's no
Yeah.
creativity to their blocking schemes. It was I like it. Every year there's like one or two of these offenses that become so predictable. I'm like, okay, they're gonna run it here. Okay, they're gonna run it here. Okay, now they're gonna pass. And when I really watched Mixon last year, because I had a lot of them last year too, helped
Yeah.
me advance a bunch of teams. He's not the most expensive or not the most explosive running back, but if you have a bad offensive line, he is going to eke out as much of like value out of that terrible situation that he can. He's going to like leverage off the first tackler to pick up the extra 2 yards and lean forward. He's going to a situation where like other running backs would average like three and a half,
Yeah.
3.67 yards. He's going to get 4.1, 4.2, 4.3. He also got hip drop tackled last year, missed some time, had an ankle injury, fought through it. Despite some nagging injuries, despite the worst play calling in the league, he still got there for 16 fantasy points per game in half PPR. 16 half fantasy points per game, pretty good. And if Nick Chubb even siphoned off like okay, two or three more carries than Damian Pierce already did. Um, some people are talking about like Nick Chubb's going to take his goal line work. They're not giving the goal line work to the $2 million running back over the $10 million star running back. That's just not going to happen. Um, and I think Joe Mixon is set up for a year where now the other bear thing I hear about Mixon is that oh well the new play caller might like not call as many run play or they're not going to be so reliant on the run, but it's like okay, but they're going to be sustaining more drives than they were last year if they have better play calling. The efficiency should go up. So even if they run a little less, it could be offset by the increased efficiency. And if they're just sustaining more drives, that's just more offensive volume. The pie increases, more red zone opportunities. He had 11 touchdowns last year. I mean, you could get that up to 13. He also missed about like a month. So, I mean, this dude profiles like there really is no fundamental difference in his points per game than the guy I'm about to name. They both teams added a running back this offseason, but they averaged the same amount of points per game last year. Kyron Williams. Can anyone really tell me what the fundamental difference is in the projections between Joe Mixon and Kyron Williams? Because I
So Kyron's team is projected, I believe, fourth in points. The Texans are 18th. This it shows how much I'm more of a team person now. Mixon is a real life player. Yes, he can do all of the things as a running back. Now I don't think he's elite at anything necessarily. Like he can break tackles, but he's not obviously not Derrick Henry. He can catch
right.
passes, but he's not Achan Kamara. Achan is historically great as a receiver in terms of his target volume and what he does with that volume. And Mike McDaniel obviously has a very special type of offense where Tua's getting the ball out in a league low in terms of a time to throw on his throws, and that includes anticipating to Tyreek and Waddle. But that helps Achan a lot because historically, during the McDaniel era, the offensive line has not been anywhere close to decent or acceptable if they want to be a winning team. Now, the issue with Mixon that I see, at least in comparison to Kyron is the beneficiary of being on the Rams. If Mixon was on the Rams, I would take him RB 7 or 8. But
So I would say even with that, last year they paced for about the same amount of rushing yards and touchdowns on a per game basis, same amount of fantasy points per game. And there's quite a real possibility that with Devontae Adams coming into town, the Rams skew a little more pass heavy in the red zone than they did in years prior, where the Texans lose Tank Dell, they lose Stephon Diggs. Both teams seem better off than they did last year in terms of scoring points. There were definitely some rough patches for the Rams in terms of Cup missing time and
yeah,
Puka missing time. So the Rams could also be, like you said, projected fourth in points. That's certainly possible. And, I would say potentially likely. But are they going to give like Kyron like 20 rushing touchdowns? or they've openly really talked about a committee looking at what Tampa Bay did last year. I haven't heard the Texans come out and say they've said that they want to lighten the workload on Mixon a little bit, but to me that reads a little bit kind of like 2024 Kyron, where it's like, oh yeah, we're bringing in Corum, so Kyron doesn't have to have like 100% of the touches. But there's a chance where Kyron drops down to like a 65, 70%. Now he should still get the goal line uh, touches, but I'm more worried about a Jarquez Hunter than I am a Nick Chubb at this stage in their careers from a juice perspective. And you know they were both pretty similar last year. Also on um, Mixon had 130 more receiving yards despite missing 4 games than Kyron, so he offers a lot more in the receiving game. And you get into the Brees Halls and the James Cooks. It's like when we're doing week one projections, like Mixon is going to project for as many points as James Cook and Kyron. Like doing the
Yeah.
battle royales last year, every week he was right there in the projections with those guys. We just don't like Joe Mixon for whatever reason. And I was making the exact same case for him last year that I am this year. And I'm going to ride that 20% exposure. I'm going to run it right back.
Well, I think at his price, he's a solid value. I think within this group, I still prefer the other guys. Now, James Cook had what 16 touchdowns last year, a big number.
Yeah.
And when you're a Buffalo Bill, life is easy for James Cook, relatively speaking. Mixon is behind what we think is the league's worst offensive line. Now he'll recover some of that downside and the 18th overall points from just being able to do a little bit of everything. I think that Nick Chubb and I would take Nick Chubb and Woody Marks over Damian Pierce and Daria Gumbawale. Just overall. Now, is Nick Chubb the funnest player? Not necessarily, but is he going to do what the staff wants him to do? I would think so, and execute at a high level. So I think it's going to be a little bit of just a frustrating cut where he's getting 65, 60, 65. Now his snaps are on the lower side, but his opportunities were still pretty high. So they do rotate him a bit on some of the stuff where he's not necessarily getting the ball. But that does concern me. Now I believe he's in my tier 2, if I'm not forgetting. But give me a Chuba Hubbard that's in a Dave Canales offense that's one of the best lines. They're projected to score not as much, 25th, but this is a run first team that can block the F out of anybody. And it's a team that I am betting above what the market is in terms of where Bryce Young is going, where Jalen Coker, Adam Thielen. I just think the Panthers in general, it's more about the offense. Joe Mixon is a real player. If he was with Dave Canales, if he was with Clint Kubiak, I'd feel much stronger about him. But I'm kind of more medium. I know you're like, you know, uh, let's say in the cabinet of the Joe Mixon fan club, but the president, we'll see. We'll have to do a deep dive. But I mean, you're at least running for president. This is the
Yeah, I'm in the
candidacy
mix.
live. Yeah,
I've
yeah.
got my hat in the ring. I will say just one more on the mix and snap share stuff. So last year, and this is like, something I hear a lot, that like his workload will regress, and I do hear those concerns, but Mixon only exceeded 80% snap share one time, only over 75% 3 times. He was really in the 65 to like 71% bag a lot because he was really not playing a lot on third downs. Um, he had 72%, then he got hurt. Came back 42%, 66, 76, 56, 76, 81, 77, 75, 64, 66, 48. Then a meaningless week 18 game where he just came in for a few snaps, and then 71%, 53%. So he's in that 71 to 75, a bunch of 60s in there. I think he could run back like 70%. Maybe he goes from like 71% average to like a 65. Like I That's where you give like Nick Chubb 2.5 more carries a game. That's shaving Joe Mixon from like a 16 points per game guy to a 15, a 14.5. Still a great player. And that's if that happens. That's if Nick Chubb stays healthy. The Woody Marks of it is a total wash to me. I think he's taken the Dare role, who was like pretty locked in that third down role. And and I know the offensive line is quite poor. However, it can't be worse than it was last year, which was really bad. And if we have equally as bad objective players on that offensive line, but we get more creative schemes and usage, and you know, who knows how bad these guys really would have been last year if they had like a coach to help them out in any regard. So I think it's an interesting thing to think through. Whereas I'm a little more worried. I still love Devon Achan. I take him at like that early second round, but it's like what
Mhm.
has fundamentally changed in that situation? You know, Mike McDaniel. The only thing that's changed is they just got rid of the one guy who could sustain drives for them last year. So it's interesting to think through. You know, the offensive line situation is not great, but Mixon managed to turn 16 points per game out of that. And if we get some more creative play calling, we get just a better Stroud performance. Maybe their pass rate over expectation increases a little bit and they just run a little less. But I think an identity of this team, you lose Tank Dell, you lose Stephon Diggs, you have some rookie receivers. To me, this feels like a team that still wants to establish it a bit. And it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for Mixon. But I will say he is a bit older and a bit riskier injury wise than your
Mhm.
next guy, Chuba Hubbard, who is pretty exciting. So why don't you tell me about why you like Chuba Hubbard in tier one?
So mentioned him a touch here earlier in our Mixon argument, but it's mainly the team situation. The coach is as run first as it gets. If you're the RB1 in a Dave Canales system, you're in a pretty good position. This line is projected to be once again one of the best run blocking lines. You have a quarterback that's mobile and Bryce Young that helps the efficiency with the running backs because in a run set you have to at least account someone for the quarterback. So overall that helps his efficiency. Now Rico and uh, ETN getting drafted there does give me some concern, but that feels like more of a long term. I think Rico gets real work, and I think he's an amazing value at running back 54 around once in the 170s. But I think this is going to be one of the top offenses in terms of run volume. I think they'll I think they'll be better than we think. Just overall as an offense, is a bet on the offense, the line, and this was the first year that Chuba had kind of a real majority role. He's been in the 50, 60 range 2 years ago, but this past year he was one of the best uh, in terms of rush yards over expectation. I believe he was top five at the position. Now it is would be considered a real breakout, but he was considered one of the best pure rushers. Now, on his downside would be that if this team is bad, his receiving is nothing great, but just that pure rushing, that upside of being able to put up the crazy run totals is something that I just could not hesitate to put him in that tier one with Ken.
Yeah, the supreme talent shocked a lot of people last year for sure. I had always liked Chuba, but I didn't realize he had that in him. Um, and that's where I guess I have a little hesitation when I'm splitting hairs. I still have Chuba higher on this list than I have him lower. But I'm like, man, was that a 1 year wonder? But I think he showed enough, and he has such a good college resume. Was a total stud back in the day. Um, I trust him. I trust the offensive line. I trust Canales. Do I trust Bryce Young? I don't know, Jim. But it's a fun situation. I also wonder, you bring in Rico Dowdle and you bring in Trevor Etienne, who I don't personally believe in as a player. I know he went fourth round. I Teams make bad picks all the time. Like they take Trevor Etienne over DJ Giddens. Teams just get it wrong sometimes.
Mhm.
But that level investment on top of Rico just makes me wonder, like, do they want to lighten Chuba's load a little bit? He did get hurt at the end of last year. Do they want to say, like, man, we really put a lot on his shoulders? We initially intended to have Jonathan Brooks here and Miles Sanders.
Mhm.
Like, do they, in a perfect world where last year, did they want to deploy Hubbard quite to that extent? And that's where, when I'm splitting hairs, I think Chuba will be more efficient than a Mixon, but I have a little more faith that the Texans are willing to be reckless with his usage than I do the Panthers. With that said, I think Chuba, in many regards, could easily be the better pick. He's younger, less injury history. Like you said, the offensive line's great. So some of it hinges on what is Canales' plan for him. Will he run back the usage from last year? Um, and what can Bryce Young do in year three? I don't think we're getting a benched Bryce Young again. He broke out to some extent at the end of last year, but
Mhm.
the breakout was coming from like a really low bar.
That's true. He was better. All he had to do was be better than Dalton last year, and his snap share was above 75%. He was first in the group amongst obviously two of the guys in this range are rookies. He was first in the group. I could see it go down. His red zone was also above 85%. Now, I think he could maintain that role. It depends. I think Rico is kind of more of a perhaps it's a two drive to one drive, and Chuba gets the high value touches. The lack of receiving and game scripts does make him concerning, but we've had games a little bit of game script dependent pure runners, and Canales is still going to want to run the ball at least when the game is manageable. Now, if they're just getting demolished, they'll just spread it out and get another one of the guys out there to go and catch passes. I don't think he's going to have a monopoly on the role. He caught 43 passes last year, but it was very uninspiring check down type of stuff, and he wasn't graded out very well. But
Pretty tough. 4.0 yards per reception is
yeah,
actually
that's
a lot lower than I thought. I think Rico Dowdle sneakily was a better receiver. I mean, I got
yeah.
4.0 yards
I
per
think he
reception.
was straight up like it.
Yeah, 4.0 is pretty low, but you're taking him to be that pure rusher um, between the tackles and just rack up double digit touchdowns and efficient yards per carry. Yeah, Rico last year, 6.4 yards per reception. So yeah, a little more juice or feel maybe for Rico in space in the passing game, and that's where I wonder, like, man, Rico is like no slouch, dude. Like he was 1,000 or he was 100 yards off of Chuba. He had 1,000 yards in his own right. It just doesn't feel like that because Dallas refused to like run at the goal line if they even got there because they just
Yeah,
couldn't
without
sustain
Dak, it
drives.
was definitely a pretty chover for the team. Rico's one of my most owned players in best ball, period, because he does have not elite three down skill set, but he can do enough. But I
Do
think
it.
it's just there's enough room for two running backs, and Chuba has that home run type of potential that it's close. And I'm not actually projecting this, but Saquon Barkley's value blew up because of the home run rushes, and from
Right.
an upside perspective, Chuba does have that in his bag. I don't see that. Kenneth Walker definitely has it in his bag, but I don't see that in the rest of this group. There really isn't
Do you think
anyone
there's
with that consistent on a running basis. Now there are others in this group.
do you think there's any world where Rico can force like a true 1A 1B split as opposed to like right now I think people are projecting Hubbard to kind of have his similar role to last year and Rico to come in and absorb some of the Miles Sanders type stuff. But I think he's good enough to carve out a little more work than last year's Panthers backups did. You think there's like how big could the gap potentially shrink between these two guys? Or are you like fairly confident like they're going to roll with their guy from last year who they've given an extension to and Rico's kind of in that like Braylon Allen like getting like the 30% of the work or whatever, and then the contingent is where it gets really crazy.
Yeah, I think about 70-30 on rushes. I think Rico will catch some passes, and I think a lot of it is kind of a 1 year fill in for Jonathan Brooks, who they hope to see next year. So I think there's some degree I don't see a Rico takeover. There are some exciting backups in this league. Even Charbonnet would be the best backup in this entire list by far. And I don't think Walker is going to give up that throne. So I think
Well,
there's I think there's a
I
very clear hierarchy. At least that's how I see it.
I would say maybe the most exciting backup on this list. We might have one or two actual real life backups on this list, but we'll get to those
Oh,
later.
that's true. That's true. That's true.
In
I got ahead
fact,
of
we might
myself.
get to one of them now. RJ Harvey. Now, I like RJ Harvey. He's not on my list yet, but I do like RJ Harvey, my most drafted player in the pre-draft portion. However, like you just made the case for Chuba. I love Chuba. The man's coming off 1,200 damn near rushing yards and 10 touchdowns. Hard to put a rookie who a lot of people had as like a round 3, round 4 guy goes second round over that, especially with the addition of J.K. Dobbins, who a beat reporter this week said is likely to be the starter now. Sean, what do we think about this beat report from one guy, not the
Yeah.
mainstream media, one guy who said J.K. Dobbins will likely be the starter, which we assume means in week 1. So how do you see that playing out with Harvey, and where are you at with him?
So they also mentioned that Harvey will get extensive touches. I think Jaleel McLaughlin is more of like, if the game's out of hand, then they'll just let him roll with it. So you do lose some garbage time potentially there. Harvey was still, when you're a running back taken in the second round, especially in the modern era, that's a very serious investment, especially in a very deep RB class. Harvey is a three down skill set as both a runner and a receiver. He's a bit older, so there's a little bit more of an expectation like, hey, you better be ready to play right away. This isn't a, for example, Trevor Etienne, I believe, is 20 or 21. So I think he gets more time to develop, and maybe he's something, we'll see. But for Harvey, there's the expectation that he's going to contribute right away. I think it's some pre-training camp like, hey, everything in this organization is earned by any offensive line measure, at least from the stuff that's mentioned publicly, that uh, Mike Clay and Fantasy Points have this as the second best line in the National Football League, period, for both passing and running. And it was good to be. Javonte Williams also got a lot of receiving work in this offense. Bo Nix led the NFL, I believe, in check down targets, and that's Harvey's game. That's not Dobbins' game. Dobbins was efficient as a rusher with the Chargers last year, and he'll do well behind a good offensive line like he did in LA. But I don't think with his health concerns, LA obviously opted to go with Najee Harris and draft a Marion Hampton in the first round over retaining him. That has to hold value. I think Dobbins will contribute, and he was a lot more fun to take when it was the 19th round because apparently free agents can never sign later than the immediate free agency period, and that definitely means nothing for some other free agents that used to be pretty good that get drafted super late. But this is an RB discussion, so I've saved the crash out. But I think it's just you're behind one of the best lines. You can do everything, do it all back. If the Broncos are probably somewhere middle of the league, wins and losses, I'll have to check on that in terms of. But if it's a negative game script, he's the guy in there. And uh, also relevant is Liam Cohen really wanted the Jaguars to trade up to get him, and we're pretty sure that Liam Cohen knows something about running backs, given how well Bucky Irving was. Now, maybe the front office just handed them this guy, but I'm pretty certain he had a pretty big voice in that.
Yeah.
So that has to count for something. So that's all of those things included. The situation is live for him, and most running backs in this league get a committee situation. So why can't he just crush it, especially late in the year?
Totally. It makes so much sense for, week one, trot out the veteran for the first snap. You know, we remember when Michael Carter was going in the same round as Brees Hall a few years ago. Now J.K. Dobbins is theoretically a better player than Michael Carter. And, RJ Harvey maybe doesn't have the same cachet as a Brees Hall, but it's just to illustrate that, you know, the veteran can be a little pesky September, maybe early October, but later on, I think we should have pretty strong confidence based on what the market tells us. It just intuitively makes sense that not only is RJ Harvey probably going to be the fresher back later in the season, he's more likely to be healthy than J.K. Dobbins, who almost never finishes a season healthy in the NFL. Unfortunately, just his body has failed him in some random instances,
Mm-hmm.
and he's kind of a weird back, J.K. Dobbins, in the sense of that like he'll break long runs, but then he'll be fast, but he'll pull up and like just get caught, but like he's still running fast. I've never seen anyone break such long runs while looking so bad doing it like J.K. Dobbins like the last 2 years. It's kind of a strange
It's
phenomenon.
interesting. Yeah,
It's
he's like a doubles hitter in baseball, like a guy who doesn't hit home runs, doesn't hit singles, but he hits doubles like crazy. I think partially you give credit to his vision. That's the only thing that would make
right,
sense in that scenario. If you're not athleting your way to that, or just in last year's case, having a good line does help. But
right.
there are running backs and good lines that do nothing. Javante Williams, but like,
No, that's a
so
really good
it's
way to
certainly
put it.
credit to his skill as well. So, but
He
the
has
lack of home run
amazing
hitting is,
vision.
yeah,
It's
the
sad to really not to get too much off of J.K. Dobbins tangent, but it is sad to think about what he could have been because his vision is insane. He's always finding the right hole, and he still has like a little bit of initial burst. But yeah, it that combination of when you're behind a good offensive line and you know exactly the angle you need to take, you can pick up like 30 yards. Um, but at the end of the day, I think RJ Harvey has even more juice. As many have said, he can make a guy miss in a phone booth. I know that's your favorite expression, hearing that
yup,
20 times a
definitely
day in
have
March.
literally all the time. So then, what's preventing you from the tier two
So
thing
if
in
I
this scenario?
so when I break down this range and the top six out of the seven guys we have ranked in here, I have above average to above average exposure to. If I were to label them, tier one are the guys I feel really confident in terms of the workload and Mixon and Kenneth Walker in terms of the explosiveness, and just getting like a ridiculous number of targets. Chuba, I just ding like a hair down because just maybe a smidge of Rico Dowdle being a little annoying, but he could easily have been right there. Um, and then this tier three with Harvey for me is where I have Harvey. It's just where it's like, okay, the drum beat is a little more annoying than I would have liked. Like, I'm not hearing anything about like Rico Dowdle's going to be really cutting in a Chuba 1-2 punt, like a true 1A 1B.
Hmm.
Whereas RJ Harvey, it's like, dang, I have to worry about like RJ Harvey's probably going to be projected for like 10 points or 11 points week one, whereas Chuba's projected for 15. Now that could normalize by the end of the season, but I feel like I'm
Yeah.
sacrificing a little bit of early season with Harvey.
Oh,
Um,
I get it. So in especially in a season long, that makes Chuba to you more appealing because you can expect it over a longer period, or if you're in a marathon or one of these longer contests. But RJ seems so live for the late season rookie breakout
yeah,
that we're hunting after.
no doubt about it. He could easily like be the guy you need in the playoff weeks. Um, and if Dobbins goes down, it's like, oh my god, like I can't even conceive. I mean, Julian McLaughlin would get some touches or something. I don't even know if Audric Estime makes the active roster. Um,
I don't think
but
so.
the third tier for me are guys who I'm just a little bit more worried about the competition they have. Whereas Woody Marks for me was Nick Chubb is interesting because if Nick Chubb can there's a world where Nick Chubb is like healthy again, and he's like got the Dobbins renaissance that we saw last year. So that's where I'd be concerned. For me, Woody Marks was like a Trevor Etienne ass pick, just like the worst between the tackles, rusher in the class, and does the Dara thing. So Chubb could be the wrench that I'm overlooking, but I'm personally, combined with the rookie thing, with we actually saw it from Dobbins last year, unlike Chubb. That's just where I drop him down a little bit. But you would not shock me at all if RJ Harvey of all these guys had the most points in the weeks that matter the most, weeks 15 to
Mm.
17, offsetting his, maybe slightly hurt advance rate compared to the vets, where he might be catching a ton of passes. He's likely to be the freshest, and now he's definitely a fun click for sure.
Yeah, I mean, taking a ton of him. I've had him sometimes in the late 60s, early 70s, a couple times, and that it's been awesome. So,
And
and
then James Conner, another fun click, another volume click. A lot of overlap with him and Joe Mixon potentially in terms of like the archetype of like, okay, they got a little bit of an injury prone label to them. James Conner, pretty fun in the passing game. How do you feel about Conner heading into this year?
love him. If it's our, he used to go in the like maybe 5 slots back. He's been trending up lately, so I've been getting slightly less of him than I'd hoped. But the Cardinals are projected to finish ninth in points. We
Wow.
don't we don't have evidence that the uh, that there's a Trey Benson kind of renaissance here, that or a taking of a passing of the torch in any sense. He's just a clear second guy. If something happens to James Conner, then okay, we're fine with it. But James Conner was one of the best receiving backs, especially with the ball in his hands. He was up there with some of the yak. I believe he was the most productive running back on screens last year, even ahead of like Bucky Irving or Kamara, some of the people we expect to be there. But obviously, some of that season to season, there's small samples. It depends. Line is somewhere in the middle. Fantasy points likes their line. Mike Clay doesn't. So that's kind of a mixed bag there, but at least it's solid enough. In general, the Cardinals offense should be better if Marv is improved to what we think he is. Then that's going to lift the offense. You still have Trey McBride. Michael Wilson should hopefully be better. In general, this offense is going to be very good. Now, could Kyler can't really Jalen Hurts him, but on some of those read option plays, he could, in the past, in Kyler's heyday, he's faked it to Connor and ran it in himself. And the injuries are definitely a concern, of course, but could say that about most of the players in this group. And he just does everything pretty well. And there's enough juice in the offense that I'm excited for him regardless. And that's really a pro Kyler take as well.
Yeah, I'm starting to pack a bit heavier James Conner bags now. I've actually flipped him over Harvey in my rankings just because I'm like, man, dude, like
Wow.
James Conner was like one of the guys you needed, top five guys you needed in weeks 15 and 16 last year. The man is so reliable now. What gives me a little bit of pause with him is I do think Trey Benson is going to be a bit more of a thorn in the side. Trey Benson himself, now you could say Trey Benson himself is coping when he says this, but he talked specifically this offseason about how he thinks that the coaching staff is going to implement him. He said, quote, I feel like I'll get more opportunities and help James out more. He also talked about coming off his injury and just, the rookie struggles. But he was actually quite efficient, 4.6 yards per carry. He was a little rougher to start the year, had one pretty brutal game. But besides that, he actually started to piece together, albeit in a small sample size, like just more efficient games by the end in that limited sample size. And Jonathan Gannon, quote, called them a 1A, 1B in a quote
There you
this
go.
offseason, which like it just makes sense that like there were points last offseason early on where after the draft when both Cardinals were going, Trey Benson was going about 6 picks ahead of James Conner. So this is a guy that we at least liked as a talent. Now, I'm not saying that was right. I thought that was wrong, and I wasn't taking any Trey Benson. I was taking a lot of James Conner. But year two, round two running back who the coaching staff is talking, they have investment in. If he's healthier, if he's learned the offense more, they feel like they can trust him a bit more. They're incentivized, I feel like, to play Benson a bit more than year one. Let him and take off the load from James Conner, who again dealt with injuries by the end. Like he got hurt immediately in week 17 last year. He always seems to miss at least a game or two each year. Um, he's a guy who, again, I think like, man, if he's healthy, he could smash. But I just have a smidge more concern about the RB2 on his team ascending into like a 35% role as he is in his age 30 season.
I can see the logic of just the progression of that, but we've seen second round running backs like AJ Dillon had hype at one point.
True.
Charbonnet is still behind Ken Walker. James Conner's signed for a pretty significant long term investment. So I still think he's still the man in this backfield, and really the offense in an ideal world would build it as a run heavy offense. Now, when you have Kyler, Marv, and Trey McBride, of course, they're going to spread the ball out a bit more, but I think it's just same old, same old. Now, he did miss 4 games 2 years ago and 4 games 3 years ago, and he did miss a game and get hurt early last year. So there is concern for that, especially in season long, where you get to the playoffs and he's been producing and then twist an ankle when it matters, or or any in-game matchup. That's definitely a concern. But when this is an offense that we're pretty excited about, and he really is a do-it-all running back, and I just don't see Trey Benson usurping or really taking that. Where sometimes it is notable to mention that when the player, the coach says that, but sometimes we've been burned by that, particularly with Dylan and Charbonnet.
No doubt about it. And every situation's different. Sometimes that guy comes in, year one and he's obviously better. And, you have your Bucky just usurping Rashad White, sending him to dust immediately. Sometimes you have an AJ Dillon and the guy stinks and he can't do anything. And then sometimes you have a Sharps, like you said, where it's like, yeah, he's a pretty solid player, but he's just buried depth chart wise. Um, but Connor is approaching that age where I just, once you hit 30 as a running back, it's like I've heard of, crazier things than the year two, round two running back who the team seems to be into. And he himself feels like they've kind of, now you could be assured of more touches today. It doesn't mean it's going to actually happen when the game's going on and the game's
Of
on the line
course.
and the coach, meant to put you in for 6 snaps in the fourth quarter. It's like, yeah, we're going to roll with James today and for the next 2 months straight. So it could, for me, it comes down to a talent of the RB2 being and the age of the RB1. Just now that applies to Mixon as well, but it's more of like a Trey. I'm more worried about Trey Benson's youth and talent forcing himself on the field for like a pesky amount of snaps. With that said, I'm still into James Conner. Round 6, that's a smash. You have him going around some other receivers with injury risk and, 1 year wonders and Jawan Jennings. Still
Yeah.
taking some of those guys. Roma Dunze, a lot to like in his profile, but a lot to dislike. Sometimes you just need a running back there. Can't always take a wide receiver. And James Conner's like, man, if he's healthy and cooking at the right time, he could easily be the guy you need once again.
Yeah, and it's a very good high upside bailout if you're going receiver heavy, or you go elite QB or tight end, and you're kind of a spot behind. So I just like good players and good offenses. I think in this modern era, whether that's just better training methods or analytics or whatever, it seems like these running backs seem to age a little better than we're used to. I used to be pretty hardcore on the age curve stuff, especially for running backs, but I think I've had to ease up a little bit
Sure.
on some of these as we've seen Derrick Henry just smash. We've seen
Well,
Kamara
Derek
do well.
Derek Henry's not human, so I'm
That's
gonna just
true.
leave him entirely out of this
Yeah.
conversation. But no, it is true that you know, like we saw with Dobbins, I faded him entirely last year. I was like, Achilles tear, he's cooked. He's not going to do anything.
Yeah.
That injury isn't what it used to be 8 years ago, 6 years ago. So everything is changing. And you have to kind of like adjust like each year and be like, okay, well, maybe an ACL isn't what it used to be, or an Achilles, and especially in James Conner's case, he hasn't had anything like too crazy like an Achilles. It's just been nagging little this or little that. So fun player for sure. All these guys so far, pretty fun players. On to the next tier. So we touched on Connor, we touched on Harvey. One guy that we haven't touched on yet is Alvin Kamara.
Mhm.
Now, Alvin Kamara is a fascinating case because he arguably has the widest range of outcomes, in my opinion, for this season, where he could be the highest scoring guy on this list if he is traded to a team that will score score real life points.
Yep.
The Chicago Bears realize the DeAndre Swift and Roshan
Yup.
Johnson thing is cooked, and they're like, dude, hey, Saints, you guys, you're not winning any games at the moment. How about we give you a pick for the running back who's not doing anything for you? Um, and that's not through Kamara's fault. He's still an awesome player, had some massive performances last year,
Yup.
sneaky, like elite RB1, not in that Saquon tier, but obviously he doesn't have to be in that Saquon tier when he's going where he is. Honestly, I'm talking myself into moving Kamara up as we speak. But the problem is, man, Tyler Shuck, Spencer Rattler. People talk about the Browns quarterback situation. The QB3 on the Browns would start for the Saints guaranteed.
Yeah, give me Shador over the Saints room all
Yeah.
day. And Derek Carr is very underrated. The
Yes.
retired Derek Carr. He was, if you protected for him, he actually was very good. And
Like I
he
get
liked throwing to running backs too.
Right. Like I get he would like did annoying little things in a game. He'd like throw a hospital ball or like he'd like do a weird throw away on fourth down sometimes, but he would accumulate yards. He would score points. You know, we're comparing Derek Carr, like a $40 million quarterback, to Tyler Shuck, who couldn't make third team All ACC when he was 25 years old. Can we stop it? I heard a podcast today say, like, oh, well, I mean, if Tyler Shuck's just like the 18th best quarterback this year. There is no universe. If Tyler Shuck is the 18th best quarterback, I will take out generational debt and pay one of the people who comment on this video, like, comment, subscribe. Hey, if you like, comment, or subscribe to this video as a result of this video, I will give you $2 million if Tyler Shuck is the 18th best quarterback in real life, PFF grade this year. Moving on, he's not going to be. I appreciate you
Yep.
liking, commenting, and subscribing. You're not getting $2 million because that ain't happening. Tyler Shuck sucks. So does Spencer
Yeah.
Rattler. So does Jake Hayner. So they're not going to be able to sustain drives is my concern. Now that's going to manifest itself in a lot of Kamara dump offs and like just quarterbacks freaking out and stuff. Some Olave, whatever. He's just such a target accumulator, a reception accumulator, a volume guy, at least through the passing game, and enough rushes and goal line attempts to just overall, it all comes together to an RB1 season. But he's got, if he gets too much work at his age, it feels like the team could be so bad that he is the one guy on this list that is like a shutdown candidate. If you get the annoying ankle injury, as you mentioned before, it could be anything from this guy's not playing in weeks 15 to 17 because he's still on the Saints. There's nothing to play for and he's banged up versus this dude is the RB3 in fantasy on the Bears or whoever would trade for a running back that needed it at the time.
Absolutely. So with your bet, I just want to also add that there should be a minimum games that he's played and started. We don't want some Joe Milton fluky trash scenario where Joe Milton had a really high PFF grade for his one game that he played. But if you think Joe Milton's a top 10 QB, then feel free to just
No, thank
you
you for
know
saving me and
turn
adding that
off
disclaimer.
turn off the close the laptop, go home, get some
The,
sleep, and remember that Joe Milton is not a top 10 quarterback.
the
Okay,
lawyers
that
were
is
about to come for
ridiculous.
me after
Yeah.
Tyler Shuck plays 2 games and has like the a Joe Flacco 2023 game and a Drew Lock 4 touchdown week 17 game and calls it a day at the end of the year. Now, We don't want that smoke. This has to be real fucking 12, 13 games played, Tyler Shuck. 12,
Yep.
13 starts. 18th best quarterback in the league, my ass. It's not happening.
Yeah, yeah. Let's
Just
say
stop.
12 games, 80% of snaps, like
Yes.
minimum. Like not some oh, he just threw one deep ball and it like landed in Shahid's hands because Shahid's a good deep ball receiver.
At that point, you can collect on the money that I do not
Yeah,
have and will not be able
exactly.
to
So
procure for you.
that's very important. That's a multi-million dollar little caveat there. So let's square that away. So pretty much in line with you on this one. The Saints are 31st in points, and around
Ooh.
the playoff weeks, it doesn't get
Is that
any better
bad?
than that. Yeah,
That's it's not good.
if you're 31 in a group of 32 of something, it's not great. So if they're losing, he could get dump downs. I think Kendre Miller is a little bit more relevant in a scenario where he could get traded. He could also get traded at the deadline. I too believe that Tyler Shuck is not great at football. You know, personal things aside, as pure football players, I think Shador is much better than he is. I don't think he should have sniffed the second rounds. Probably more of a 4 or 5 type of prospects, and just given his age, his injuries, lack of upside. This is not a Bo Nix scenario where he's like top rated PFF. He's running an amazing offense. He's doing things off script. He had the best pass blocking offensive line in the league by far. If you look at like the time to throw stats, like anything in that realm. So we're not seeing that. The line is supposed to be pretty solid if he's healthy, but he's never reached 1,000 yards. It's also a bet on Kelvin Banks, who's a really good athlete, top 10 pick. But the problem is the team is simply bad, and taking RBs in a bottom 5 offense is not a recipe for success. Now, with that said, this is age adjusted. He's probably top 10 to 15 talent. He's done well for fantasy, but that's in systems with Drew Brees, with Derek Carr that love throwing, that get a lot of passing volume. Now, the Chris Olave Propaganda Society will crash out on saying anything nice about Derek Carr, but unfortunately, he is actually pretty solid, especially throwing to Shaheed. But the lack
Do you
of
know,
rushing and the receiving, you know, makes him a tier
just to,
three, not a tier two. So I cut you off.
just to really, no, no, my bad. I was just going to ask, who did Tyler Shuck back up, not for just 1 year, but 2 years in college? In 2018 and 2019, the first two of his 7 years in college.
Are they in the NFL?
They are in the NFL. They are probably like one of the top 10 quarterbacks.
Was it Lamar Jackson? No,
It
he
was,
transferred to Louisville.
so it was actually, I had to look this up, Justin Herbert. He backed up Justin Herbert for
Oh
2 years
wow!
at Oregon in 2018 and 2019,
Look at that.
pre-COVID. 2 year, this guy who was in the 2025 draft class played two full football seasons before we knew what COVID-19 was. He played 3 years at Oregon in total. You know, there were red shirts, there were this, there were
Right.
that. Before his seventh season, just to hammer home how worthless this environment is going to be for fantasy points. This guy's expected to be like the QB1 for most of the season for New Orleans, by the way. Uh, didn't have more than 1,559 yards in his first 6 seasons in a given season. That's where he maxed out until year 7, where he had 31.95, 23 and 6. So you're the oldest guy damn near in college football. You're a seventh year quarterback playing against 20, 21, 22 year olds. You can't make third team all ACC. You can't elevate your team. He also had, I think it was the highest throwaway rate in the nation. If not, it was one of the highest throwaway rates in the nation, meaning he got scared a lot. Meaning he was like, oh my God, oh, I don't know what to do, throw it away. So this dude who couldn't do anything but be a game manager until his 7th year and then was still getting
Crazy.
scared shitless was like, this is a guy who's not going to be scared in the NFL. This is a guy who's going to be, if he was like fourth in probably in the ACC in terms of like all conference, I think he's probably going to be pretty safe to say fourth in his division in terms of quarterback. Baker or
Yeah,
Bryce. Yeah, and
Penix.
Tyler Shuck is just going to be a trivia name, a bar trivia name, like 8 years ago, 8 years from now, where it's like, oh yeah, John Beck. Like name your like favorite like quarterback who had like you know 20 starts in the NFL for just a poverty
Yeah.
franchise, and just totally worthless in the end. So that's all to say. I still kind of like Alvin Kamara because he's going to get a lot of checkdowns from this guy, from the said, sack of a quarterback. And it's ultimately still going to somehow manifest in 1,500 yards and a couple touchdowns. And you just hope he's healthy at the end of the year. And hey, man, if we can get a trade, Chicago, is there anywhere else that you would really, really love Kamara to go
Cowboys. I'd
as
love
we
him on
dream
the Cowboys.
with how
I know
much they'll
Miles Sanders.
pass?
I know Miles Sanders gang wouldn't be happy with that, but Rico,
Well,
look at
Miles
what Rico
Sanders
did
is
in that.
going back in that deal. You better believe for my
Yeah,
coat. Miles Sanders is going
yeah.
back,
For your
and
shares, we will protect
he's
your
living in the
shares.
tank,
Exactly.
man. Come on,
Yeah. So the Cowboys, they invested a lot in their run blocking line. They took the guard. Was it Booker? It's 12th overall, so he's a big Alabama guard. They wants to run the ball, and if they got him, that would be awesome for them. And the passing offense is going to be wide open. Dak will throw it to another target. I think in that scenario, I think Jake Ferguson would be the one losing in that scenario. I think Pickens and Lamb are unaffected by the presence of a running back. So that would be a really fun one. Washington too. I like Eckler a lot, but and B Rob is kind of like a follow the blocks, like do what he's asked to do. You throw him the ball, he'll catch it, but he's not gonna like run an option route and like beat a coverage linebacker in man and like get yacked, juke someone and go for a long touchdown. But he kind of just does the job. That would be super fun with that
that'd be
offense
sick.
with Jaden Daniels. That would be lit.
Ultimately, he feels like a kind of like a Devonte Adams from last year, where it's like it's kind of a toss up. Now it ended up working out for Devonte that he got traded. I could see it going either way, but let's operate under the assumption, I guess, for this exercise, we got him tier three, more likely than not, I guess, to stay in New Orleans. And in that event, maybe the touchdown upside is limited, but you still got crazy volume. RB1 season potentially question mark, and we're into it. Again, we really like this range of the draft. If there's something you should take away, it's like don't fade the tier three guys. Take all of these guys really, because it's a perfect sweet spot in the draft where you can address wide receiver early. Also, grab an elite tight end or quarterback if you're feeling that, or one of the other elite running backs early, and then tack one of these guys on either as your RB1, your RB2, maybe your RB3 if you're going really, strong on the RBs. There's really no build where these guys aren't great. And however, I will say this leads us into tier four where we each have the same running back in the final tier. And this is not because I don't like the talent of this player. Now, I'm starting to think, as I speak here, certain biases might have inclined you to put this guy in tier four, but we're going to get to it. Trevion Henderson, rookie running back for the Patriots, and now putting what is essentially two and two together and realizing why you might have this man here. Not questioning your integrity at all, of course.
No, not at all. There's
No,
zero
definitely.
biases involved. Uh, Travion on a per touch basis is pretty good, but Ramondre is projected more rushing totals per
100%.
Vegas. Uh, as a pure fan perspective, the long touchdown against Texas was bad Texas defense. It was not Travion doing well. They messed up, but he's still a good receiving back. The line's supposed to be middle to not great. Like if Will
That's a
Campbell's
concern for me.
if Will Campbell's really that guy, they'll move up in the middle range. But Clay has them at 18, fantasy points at 23. That's not a great scenario. Like the oh, he could be like a Jameer Gibbs, but that's behind the Detroit line with arguably the top offensive mind in the sport, or let's say top five. So
In a dome,
yeah.
Gibbs. So it's just tricky with Henderson because it's like, how good is this offensive line? He's not the six guys who go ahead of him could all easily have a 70% plus snap share as they're rolling. Harvey will get there if he's not early. Trevion, I just worry, like, is this guy just going to be like a 45% snap share, 55% snap share running back max as a rookie? Mike Vrabel famously playing, like, taking years to deploy Derrick Henry, like, over a season to, like, really get him in there. He's playing Deion Lewis for a time over
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right, Dion.
So it's like this guy is maybe not the most favorable for rookie usage. Now, I think he went out and got his guy, so maybe there's an element of like, well, he didn't bring in Ramondre. Ramondre's contract was already there. This could be his guy. But Trayvon, Ohio State still brought in Quinshon Judkins for a reason. Like teams do not when they've
Yeah.
given Trevion Henderson too much work, he breaks down. He is not there to be the workhorse. This is not a guy who has that in his range of outcomes, barring a Ramondre injury. And even then, I think they start playing it Antonio Gibson some more. So this is not to say don't take Trevion Henderson, but I kind of just don't see the real ceiling. Feels a little more like an eliminator ass pick. I don't really see the path to him getting even more like total yards, barring injury, than like a Tony Pollard type. Who goes like 15 picks later or so. I just kind of wonder, like, what do you win when you win with a maybe the RB1B on a not awesome team? I guess a lot of people are projecting a massive year two leap for Drake May, but it's like
Hmm.
Drake May's not going to be a top five quarterback, so it's not like he can Josh Allen his way to this, and we just simply will him to like 15 touchdowns. That's not going to happen. The weapons there are so maybe there's more design dump offs for Travion and just let him really cook. But like I just don't know how good this offense is really going to be at sustaining drives and scoring touchdowns.
Yeah, they're projected 23rd in points, which is not super exciting. Uh, I think the upside case for Travion is just he's just totally live as a receiver and some explosive plays. I actually think he's like more of you're just swinging for the fences type of contest where it's very it's just you're just going for it all. Now, Ramondre did have some fumbling issues, but I think last year, but I think over the long haul, I think he'll be fine. The one downside with this situation is Ramondre can also catch passes,
Yeah.
and Ohio State mostly preferred Judkins in goal line situations. Makes sense. He's more of the powerful back, but it just seems like you're getting the second guy in unless you really believe in Drake May. I could see that sort of like I believe in the quarterback, I believe in the passing offense, and then maybe there's just a vacated sense of targets. But I think Diggs, Hunter Henry, Kyle Williams, Samario Douglas, I think it's just going to be a room where Mike Vrabel wants to control the clock, and they're not going to be putting up this crazy volume and pace of play. They're going to ground and pound, get Travion in space to punish them when they're out physicaling the other team, and then it's not enough touches for me that against some of these other players. Now, I is he more exciting than maybe Jawan Jennings, perhaps him, Ricky, because it's such a complicated room in the 49ers, but amongst these running backs, no. And my fan priors are also being satisfied, so that matters.
So that helps. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's just like I guess this guy could get you there, in a week, a playoff week where it's like, he breaks a long catch or run, and he just ends up like even on the limited touches being like kind of like a Tony Pollard of old in the sense of like he wouldn't have the craziest number of touches, but just so efficient on them because he's got that juice. Just will this offense be the offense that gives you enough touchdowns and points for that to happen? I mean, maybe he's just so good that it's undeniable and they can't keep him off the field. But yeah, I really struggle with this one because I liked him as a prospect, just did not love the landing spot. I don't know if he not only like splits the goal line role, I don't even know if he gets like a decent number of the goal line touches. It's kind of feels like Ramondre profiles is the better. Now I know Travion like scored a bunch of touchdowns in college, but like college is so different than the NFL for like a guy on Ohio State. You can score from anywhere, anytime. Whereas the NFL dynamics a little different. But maybe I'm just kind of
Hmm.
underestimating like really what his receiving ceiling could be and how that, kind of like a Kamara, just like this dude might just really accumulate sneakily in the passing game compared to what I'm anticipating.
Yeah, it's more of the because Drake May isn't projected the biggest passing numbers by Vegas. That's kind of what's scaring me a bit on Travion. It's like where in this offense am I going to get the receiving work from? Or where am I as drafting him? So then Diggs, we're largely fairly bullish on Diggs if he's healthy and stops like doing ridiculous partying with Cardi B. So we'll see. But last year, I also had, on a more relevant note, that Ramondre had 75% of the red zone snaps last year. Look at that pivot from Cardi B
Skirt.
to almost knocked my microphone over from the Cardi B to Ramondre Stevenson's red zone snap share. Only here are those transitions happening. So he had
Flawless.
75% red zone snap share. Just don't see Travion's role cutting really heavy into that. I don't see that getting flipped. Now, if Ramondre is playing like fumble Rooski like he did last year, he was a plus rusher. We were taking him what 4, 5, 6 rounds earlier, and Vegas is telling us the run splits are probably about 50-50. So that to me says a lot. Now they doom a little bit roughly on rookies. So and rookies are more timing oriented, so that matters. But behind these other players, I just can't see it. Guys that have done it and some of the best overall talents in the league, I just couldn't do it. And the market roughly reflects now the James Conner flip is probably the main change on price here.
Yeah, and I really just don't even know if like his situation is that much better than like Caleb Johnson, where it's like, okay, the Steelers don't have an awesome offensive line either, but Caleb Johnson, going around later or so, Caleb is creeping up a little bit. I've noticed. So we'll see where he ends up, but that feels like the dude in Pittsburgh, like a team that really wants to establish it on the ground, almost a lock to be their goal line back. And on a half
Yeah,
PPR
100%.
half, if we're talking full PPR, but this is mostly for the context of underdog best ball. You start talking about a full PPR site like DraftKings, okay, maybe I don't really think about that context as much, but Trivion full PPR catching a lot of passes, I get it. Caleb Johnson definitely live to catch less passes than Trevion,
Yeah,
but
but
it's just like
he's not a total brick as a receiver either. He had 22 catches in his junior year, but in terms of the Iowa offense, it's like putting up like he had 10% of
right.
the target share. So he's not a brick. Najee did catch passes. Assuming it's kind of a one for one Najee role for Caleb, but the Steelers are yet another kind of tough offense to project. But Rogers could lift them up, so we'll see. But it's definitely getting closer than we think. But I still would prefer Travion. I think he goes much earlier. Now, if Travion was a Bear, I would be a lot more excited. I'd probably put him up closer to Walker or Chuba, which for me, especially, the team
Right.
matters a lot.
A
Role
lot.
obviously does
If he
as
was a
well, but
Bronco instead of RJ Harvey, total flip. Not even a question. Like,
oh, he wouldn't even make this. He wouldn't even make the
right.
discussion.
He'd be off of this list potentially just based on where he
Yeah, he
goes.
would he would be mogging this list. He's in the 3-4 turn. That's actually a fun question. Where do you think he would go? So we have Harvey 5-6 turn in a and you would assume Dobbins too. They still signed Dobbins.
Maybe around where Omarion Hampton goes.
So 4 or 5. That's fair.
Kind of like that rookie pocket of like maybe they're competing with Najee or Dobbins or something, but they've
That
got
makes sense.
juice. Good
Marion's a
offensive
bit
line.
more of a three down. He was a first round pick, Travion second. So maybe yeah,
I
five
would
slots
prefer
down.
Hampton. I'd prefer Hampton, but I think the market would be so bricked up for Henderson
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
Broncos. It was such a juicy landing spot that
Oh, that
they
checked.
just
That's why I like Harvey so much because it's just check downs galore. That's what Bo likes to do. He likes to get it in the hands of his playmakers, and he was throwing passes to Javonte Williams. Is
not
he going to
great.
throw to Harvey? Like, because
Uh,
Dobbins, that's not his game. Like, I will give an Ohio State player credit. He was good, like as a runner, he was pretty good. But receiving, that's the Harvey role. Now, Jaleel truthers are crashing out as they speak, but you don't take someone second round to get benched behind Jaleel McLaughlin. So
not quite, not quite. So Trevion, I think, is functionally going to be a better real life running back for the Patriots than for breaking fantasy. He's going to move the chains for them, but will he accumulate enough volume or like meaningful goal line touches to really break fantasy? I just don't. I just don't see it, barring a Ramondre injury. He's like Travion's like the one guy on this list. If I had to pick, like this guy's going to be the RB1B, it would have to be him.
yeah,
And I feel like where the receivers where he goes, like if I go, Henderson or one of the receivers in that pocket of Olave, Jennings, Godwin, by the next time my pick comes around and like pick 80 or so, I feel like I like the receivers a lot less when I'm getting into. Yeah, I still like Josh Downs, but I kind of rather take like the Tony Pollard. Judkins has fallen a lot. David Montgomery falls. I know their
yeah. Judkins
ADPs
is
don't.
falling a little bit now. That might get you some heat. Saying anything anti Josh Downs in this climate, that's kind of
And
that's fantasy football crime, at least in the streets these days.
look,
So
I know you
so
have to praise the almighty the almighty 5'9" Josh Downs, who's going to get, the more I think about it, absolutely mogged by Tyler Warren. But that's neither here nor there. We can't get into that and make the people crash out this fine
yeah,
evening.
yeah. The real mog is Michael Pittman, but that's fine. I'll save that glaze for another day. We'll stick to the running backs, but
Stick to the running backs tonight. And I think on that note, we touched on it. I mean, at the end of the day, this is arguably the sweetest one round pocket of running backs in fantasy when I'm like building my drafts around like knowing I want to get one or two of these guys on like pretty much every team. Um, I want to be walking away with really all these guys. The only one I'm below market on at the moment, below exposure on, is Trevion Henderson. If we can get him a little cheaper, I might just have to force myself to mix him in just because you never know. One lesson I've learned in the past is like, even if you really don't love the situation, you're like, I don't know if I can see it with the Ramondre thing. If you think a guy's really talented, you still should probably cover your bases. If you're doing volume, you're doing 50, 100 more drafts, however many you do this summer. Just cover your bases if you still think that player's really talented, even if you can't exactly figure it out. So, Shawn, ultimately, how do you feel about this pocket in drafts? Is it one that, like, am I right in that this is like the best pocket? Am I glazing it a little bit? Is it just
yeah,
like
by
one of the good
by
pockets?
this one, I do like some of the Aaron Jones, Tony Pollard,
Hmm.
uh, Pacheco, just because of the team he plays for. I don't love the talent, to be honest, but this pocket, it's every time you get even a 2 3 ADP slip, you're like, yes, like you just see green this time. Like I pretty much have like minimum one of these guys on like 80 90% rosters. I'll have to get my Travion up. The one like gold scenario for him is Ramondre's fumbling is definitely a concern, but he can catch the ball, he can run. So, and obviously if he gets hurt, but we're not taking if he gets hurt guys like in round 5 6 turn. That's Charbonnet territory. So, but this tier is so exciting.
And you just gave me an idea. Not a novel idea, but we do the 5 6 turn. We might have to do a 7 8 turn video because man, we might have some fireworks on that one where there are a bunch of guys in that turn that I have stone cold zero of. I'm
Oh,
not
really?
taking. No,
That's fun. So,
how good I feel about this tier is how bad I feel about that tier, and a lot of people disagree with me. So that could be an interesting one. But Shawn, appreciate you coming on and
yeah.
entertaining my Joe Mixon bullshit as always. Um,
It's fine. Sometimes when they zig, you zag. I mean, people like Joe Mixon, but that's a rough squad. Now, if he gets traded, now if Stroud goes downhill, here's a new spin Johnny over here. If he goes down, gets traded, the
Joe
Stroud
Mixon,
goes
the
down.
Chicago Bear, is getting 30 carries a game.
Oh my!
He's David
It's
Montgomery
that
on
is
steroids, just to the
he's
levels you couldn't imagine.
it's like it's like half Montgomery, half Gibbs, like just all in, wheels up.
One
When you put on
touch,
the Bears uniform, it changes overnight. So
the aura shifts for sure. But
exactly.
this is fun, man. Guys, if you're stuck around to the end, hit the like if you enjoyed the video. Comment which of these guys is your favorite guy, and are you attacking this range as well? And hit subscribe. I've been talking a lot, but I could get that out. Hit subscribe. We're going to be putting out videos all summer, trying to inform you guys to the best of our ability what the best way to attack these drafts are and try to win 100,000, 500,000, million or two. We're all trying to do it. But appreciate you guys tuning in. So until next time, peace.